After you review the geometric object, circle and rectangle classes, so then we also have your test driver here. So that will be test. So that's a driver program to test circle and rectangle object. So you can see here we create a new circle. So then we can, using the circle object to invoke, you see toString method actually is from which class? Right, the toString actually came from the geometric object, right? So right, earlier we say, after you have inheritance relationship, your child class can access all the accessible data attribute or method. So earlier, toString method actually is a public method. So that's why we can invoke that. So the same thing, get color is from the geometric object. But get radius, area, and the parameter that came from our circle object. So the same thing, you can create a rectangle with length and width. Since rectangle inherited from the geometric object, that's why we can invoke the toString method. So then you display the area and the parameter. So in the handout here, we have the output for the result. But one thing is, I don't want you to just look at your PowerPoint file. Supposedly, you should download all the file I give you in the demo file to test the program. So for example, here we have our test circle rectangle class. You see, you should make sure you run the program. Okay, so I run the program. Oh, I didn't show you the whole thing on the clip because sometimes the screen is not big enough when I record. So then you can see here I run. So then you should check your result in the console. Because the resolution when we record the video is not that great. So that's why I need to make sure if I show you the sample code, they should be large and easy to read from you. So then you can see here, I'm not only have the test circle rectangle class under my module 6. Okay, so you also need to make sure you have all the file you need to run. So this test circle rectangle class, you see we have the circle Java file. Then we have our rectangle Java file. Then we have test circle rectangle and the geometry object file. They are all there. So then even I cannot show you all of them, so that they are all there. So that's why you can run and test your program. So please make sure you run and test your program. So then I want to continue to show you more. So of course later, sometimes I have some, I'm not going to all the PowerPoint file. So that's why something I already explained in the video. So that's why I didn't go over that. For example, you see the extents. So actually the next one I want to show you is when we talk about after you do the inheritance relationship, right? So remember we say all the accessible attribute from the base class can be accessed from the circle class. So that I want to explain what does that mean. So you can see here about our circle class. Okay, so that means enlarge a little bit. So our circle class actually, right, you see we have the constructor function. We have the radius. But also you see we have the color and the field. So then because radius, this variable is the same as the host object radius, right? So that's why we call radius, then we assign to this dot radius. That's because radius is defined in the data attribute. So then when you have parameter radius, we want to distinguish this value we want to update from the host object radius. But then you see, right, we do have color, we do have the field, right? So can we do the same thing as this keyword? Yeah, actually, you cannot do that. The first thing is, this keyword means host object. So did you define color and the field here? No, you didn't, right? So that's why here you see those color and the field, they are belong to where? They are belong to the geometric object. And also that we say the accessible attribute. So you see here, the color and the field actually we define as private from the geometric object. Okay? So even circle class, right? Circle class, we did extend from the geometric object. Okay, but one thing is you need to be careful. Even you extend from the geometric object, but those attributes is belong to who? Belong to the parent class. So the parent class said they are private, so they are still private. So that's why the first thing, you cannot use this keyword because this means your object. You are not define the color and the field here, so definitely it's not this. But then you say, oh, it's not this. Can I use the other keyword to access then? Okay, the second thing is, no, you cannot direct access color or field from the geometric object because they are what? They are private. When we say the private keyword means they are private to within their class. So even you are my child, okay, sorry, you still cannot access my private data. So that's why here we're using the get color and set color and the set field. So we call the set color set field. That's because the set color set field is the public setter function we define in the geometric object. Okay, so that's why we can code that. Or we can code that just like this. So that's the reason earlier in the circle class or rectangle class, did you see here, we all using the set color or set field to update the color and the field. Okay, so do you understand why we call set color and set field? So right, so this one actually can we use that? The answer is no. Okay, you cannot using this. Okay. However, you cannot use this. Okay, but you can use the other one we call super. Okay, so then after we have the inheritance relationship, the next one I want to talk about the keyword is we call the super keyword. Okay, the super keyword is this keyword represent the host object. Super keyword represent the super class object. So that's why here the set color set field method is belong to the super class. So if you want, you can call super dot set color or super dot set field. So then you see here, when we see there's no error. Then if you want to test, you run this program again. Of course, they are still fine. They are still okay to show you the result. The reason is, besides you have this keyword represent the host object, we also can have the super keyword to call the super class. Okay, so now let me go back to the PowerPoint file, then I go back to the code. So when we talk about the super keyword, they are referred to the super class and can be used to invoke the super class method and the constructor. Later I will show you the constructor. So then earlier we show you the super class method. So that's why we can do the super dot set color. So then subclass inheritance accessible. You see, you need to be very careful. It's accessible data field. So if they are private, it's not accessible because private in any host, any object, they are private to themselves. So that's why even you are my child class, I only can allow you to access. One thing is like regular, you can do the public, or you can do the default. So then later on, we will talk about protected. So all the protected keyword, you can access that. So then that's the subclass inherit accessible data field and method from the superclass, but they are not inherit from the constructor function. So the keyword super refer to the superclass, and you can use info to call the superclass constructor and to call the superclass method. Okay, what does that mean? Okay, so I want to show you again. We come back to see the radius, the circle class. The circle class, you can see here, right? Right, you define the radius in the child class. You define the radius in the child class. When we create the circle object, right, so they initialize the radius from the child object. But one thing is, I want you to tell you one thing. Later is we talk about the constructor chain. So when we create any circle object from here, you see we create a circle object. But when we create a circle object, actually circle object inherited from a geometric object, right? So right, when your child is born, but child cannot be born until the parent is born, right? So actually we didn't show you here, but any constructor function from the child class, they all have a superclass already being invoked. So they call like this. But this one actually is implicitly to be called in every child constructor function. They just default if you didn't call the superclass by yourself from the child class. Compiler will call the default. Compiler will call default superclass constructor. So that's when you see no parentheses. They are all came from the first line. So like here, that's default constructor from circle. So actually constructor compiler already created this. And here you didn't see that, but compiler did call like this. Okay, so default. So the same thing here, even you set later, right? But here, when you pass in the color and field, they already call the constructor function. They call the default constructor function. So that's why here, if we want to set the color or the field, right? Okay, you can do later change set color, set field. Or from here, you can explicitly to call the constructor function. So then we see the constructor function, the superclass constructor function. We have this one, right? So this one is you can pass the color and the field to create a geometric object. So that's why here in the child class, you have radius, you have color and the field, right? Then we can do here. We can call the constructor function and pass the color and the field variable. Okay. However, you need to remember, if you want to explicitly to call the constructor function from your superclass, in your child class, those superclass constructor functions should be invoked at the first line of your child constructor function. So this one is we call the constructor chain. So earlier when I say they will be default be called from the child class in the first line for default constructor, you will read this page. But here let's talk about the constructor chain. In any case, constructing an instance of class invoke the constructor of all the superclass. Yeah, that makes sense, right? The child class object exists. You cannot have the without the parent class. So that's why when a child object is created, the parent class needs to be called. However, if this parent class have the grandparents class, the grandparents class need to be called first. So when constructing an object of subclass, the subclass constructor first invokes its superclass constructor before performance is on. So if that superclass is derived from another class, so that's a parent class, so that superclass constructor will invoke his parent class constructor before performing task.